Hello, everyone, and welcome to CSM Mastermind. My name is Andrew Marks, co-founder of Success Hacker and our Success Coaching Training Program. We're back for our final monthly live webcast of 2020. Yay, 2020 is over. Today, discussing how to avoid escalations when customers' issues arise. This free learning event is brought to you by Success Coaching, the world leader in customer success professional development training with more than 4,000 graduates across more than 60 countries. Our popular virtual instructor-led certification boot camps are now running monthly, and we've rolled out a number of new courses in 2020, including level 4 of our popular CCSM online learning program, outcome-based selling, and data-driven decision-making, hosted by our own Ed Powers here, who's joining us today. Upcoming in the first half of 2021, we're rolling out CCSM Level 5 and a number of new instructor-led programs, including change management for customer success and having difficult conversations. And in 2021, we'll also be releasing a new management track. So look out for that. To kick off 2021, we're also going to be making a change to the format of this webinar and launching a new webinar series, Customer Success Leadership Roundtable, focused on, you guessed it, customer success leadership topics. In both cases, the running time for the webinar is being extended to 75 minutes. We've decided to make this change to allow for more Q&A. Typically, we're only able to get through about half of the questions that we receive. And from the feedback that we've gotten, the Q&A aspect of these sessions is quite popular. So we've decided to allow more time for that. Anyone that needs to leave at the top of the hour can do so, but we'll be asking our panelists to stick around a bit longer for anyone who wants to keep the conversation going. You can find out more and sign up for our events at successcoaching.co. Scroll to the bottom of the page and click on the events link. Now, for those of you who haven't participated in one of these events before, this is a live and unscripted discussion where we dig into a single topic that is relevant to customer success. This right here is the only script that I follow during the entire hour. Regardless of the company that you work for, the details of your customer-facing role, or the size of the customers you deal with, we aim to pick topics that are going to be practical and useful to you. We also encourage you to suggest topics that you'd like to hear about. If you have a suggestion, please just direct message me on LinkedIn. The schedule for our upcoming CSM Mastermind events, as I mentioned, along with a whole bunch of other resources, can be found at successcoaching.co. So please check that out. We'll post a replay of this webinar along with the transcription early next week on our website. Now, there's a lot of thought leadership out there, along with a lot of theories about how to deliver customer success. This series allows us to focus on the practical and give you real-world advice, best practices, techniques, shared experiences from those out in the wild that are practicing customer success on a daily basis. And to do that, we invite 3 panelists from the customer success community to join me for a roundtable discussion. These are people that have been recommended to us as being great at their craft, and we ask them to share their experiences and perspectives. We will be taking questions, as I mentioned, later during the webcast, so please use that Q&A functionality found at the bottom of your screen to ask or upvote a question. I'm very excited to welcome our panel for today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Let's get started with Ed. Ed, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, Andrew. Good to meet everybody. Ed Powers. I have been in customer-facing roles for a long time. I've been in business about 30 years. In the last 8 years or so, I've been working very closely with customer success and customer experience, both in operating roles as well as in consulting roles. These days, I'm doing some consulting work, and as Andrew had mentioned, I'm doing some work with Success Hacker on a new course, Data-Driven Decision Making, and hoping you have a chance to check that out. Real exciting class.
Thanks, Ed. Graham, you're up.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Graham Gill. I'm the Vice President of Customer Success and Services at Accent Technologies. My teams are responsible for the post-sales journey that we all take. So I run support, onboarding, training, customer success, as well as professional services. I have a background in both product-driven roles, product-backed roles, marketing, as well as customer success, and really looking to grow my organization, and really excited to join Peter and Ed and Andrew for this conversation. It's a really exciting topic. So thank you for joining us today.
Excellent. Thanks, Graham. And last but not least, Peter.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for inviting me to join this illustrious panel. I'm really pleased to be speaking with Graham and Ed and yourself, Andrew. And hello, everybody. Thanks for attending. I hope this is a really good session for you all. I'm Peter Armley, Senior Director of Customer Success Enablement at Oracle North America for SaaS applications. And I've been in probably the software vendor world for about 25 years. In sales, pre-sales, but the last 12 years, 13 years, strictly in customer success roles, both as an individual contributor, a builder, an architect, and a leader. On the last 4.5 years, I've been with Oracle in kind of a transformational role, guiding the enablement of customer success managers and managers, but also pumping out a lot of thought leadership externally and internally. And again, I'm really happy to be here.
Excellent. Once again, I and everyone else on this webinar appreciate all of your time today. So let's get to the topic at hand. Escalations can be daunting, right? When we hear about an issue that's being escalated, it raises the stress level. People get kind of stressed out. You can't help but start thinking of the negative things that might happen that an escalation can bring, from the damage to the relationship to churn, and rightfully so. As I've said many times before, and the subscription economy is great because it's a lower barrier to entry, but it's a lower barrier to exit as well. And unhappy customers can very quickly move to a different vendor if they feel that their needs aren't being met. So while we can't make escalations completely disappear, there's a big opportunity that we have in avoiding them altogether. Or should we just ignore them and at some point they'll just go away?
No.
We all know that, right? I mean,
right. I know. I threw that out kind of tongue in cheek, but how do we avoid escalations? What do we need to do? And
well, I think the best thing you need to do is do the right things up front, which is to establish the right process for managing hot situations, because they're going to happen. You mentioned that, Andrew, and that's inevitable. Especially if you got customers who are really excited about your product and their business depends on it, then it's inevitable. So best be prepared, get the process in place as best you can, line up all the right kind of people and organizations that you expect and anticipate you're going to need to help out, and just make them part of that build and document it, maybe even do a dry run or few, and then just make sure it's ready and you're ready to go if it happens. That's probably the best thing in my mind.
Yeah, one of the things, and we, pulling back the curtain a little bit, we were talking about this briefly the other day, and I brought up the analogy of, your local firefighting group, right? You can dry run, you can go out and you can light a fire in the backyard, and you can have them come and you can see how everyone reacts in certain situations. I often like to do that same thing with inside the organization that I'm a part of. So talk with product, talk with your frontline support folks, make sure that your script for your call center works, right? Because you're going to be called into action and you want to know that it's, that you've buttoned it down. You want to simplify. You really want to make sure in 2020, there's so many different things. As Andrew mentioned, there's competition, there's, budget cuts. Simplify so that when an escalation does happen, because it will, that you're rehearsed and you understand who to go to and who you can count on to help you get out of the sticky situation.
Sorry, go ahead, Ed.
Oh, I was just going to say, if I might add to that, these moments of truth that we're talking about, these escalations, are really important. And I think people tend to kind of minimize that. One of the things that I work on people who know me know I'm a brain science geek. And what I like to look at is try to understand, what does the science say about how people make decisions and what goes into making those decisions. And one of the interesting things about these escalations is that they will tend to stick out in the minds of your customers when they're making that renewal decision, right? All of us, whenever we make a decision, when we make a retrospective evaluation of an experience, we do so on a very small number of memories. We think we remember a lot more than we actually do. And there are certain events or moments in the experience that really, really stick out in people's minds. This is one of them, is how you handle these escalations. and they will learn quite a bit about you and how your company behaves. It is truly one of those points in time where people understand if they can trust you, right? And are you going to stand behind your products and services, or are you going to stand behind your lawyers? That's what they're going to learn from you.
Wow, good statement.
Well, there was a study that you mentioned when we met on Friday to prep for this, an IBM study that I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, it's some years ago they did this back in the early 90s. IBM used to have a product called the AS400. This is when mid-sized computers were really hot before client server really took off. And they did a study of about 2,200 customers of theirs. And what they asked was really three things. They said, they asked customers, how likely are you to repurchase, right? The old loyalty question. So they asked them, how likely are you to do that? And they looked at customers who either had a problem and that problem was not addressed, whether or not that problem was addressed quickly and to their satisfaction, and whether or not they had no problems at all. So for those customers who did not have a problem, the repurchase rate was 84%, which is pretty good for a repurchase rate. For those customers who had a problem, a serious problem, and it didn't get resolved to their satisfaction or quickly, as you might expect, that repurchase rate dropped quite a bit. It went from 84% down to about 46%, so just about half. But what they found was when customers had a problem and it was addressed to their satisfaction and quickly, the repurchase rate actually went up to 92%. So it went from 84 to 92%. So the kind of the silver lining in all of this is that, again, when customers feel that they can trust you, they're much more likely to buy. It actually increases your customer retention.
That's a very enlightening study in statistics, that your repurchase rate, when the going gets tough and you show up and you address the challenges and you do it well, they're more likely to repurchase, right? So if anything, these escalations can be an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
They can definitely be an opportunity.
Yeah, we often throw around the expression trusted advisor in this industry. And really the truth is it has to be earned. And escalations are that great opportunity to earn that trust, as Ed highlights. I totally agree.
Very much so. And part of that, your customer may not remember everything that you've said to them, but they're gonna remember how you made them feel.
Yep.
And that's a big piece of earning that trusted advisor, status with your customers. But so we want to avoid escalations. We want to be like to the fire analogy. We want to be Smokey the Bear, right? We want to avoid escalations. Of course. And a lot of that has to do with expectation management, expectation setting. Now, there are some challenges, though, when expectations are being set outside of our control.
Yeah.
We handle the customer, sometimes right at contract signing, hopefully, especially for larger customers, prior to contract signing. But how do you, any thoughts on making sure that other teams that are involved in expectation management, specifically your customer acquisition side of the business, any best practices, any thoughts, perspectives on making sure that everybody's aligned?
Yeah, I'm going through this right now with my organization, and I try to inject myself. Well, I use another analogy, but step zero. That's like just as the contract is about to be signed, I want to make sure that my team's there, that I'm introducing, who runs support, what is the procedure, right? We talk about what is an escalation, right? Is it a bug? Is it a mission critical blocker? And sometimes repeating or showing who you call, who you go to, is a great way to seal the deal, because it gives them something tangible, the signing customer or the prospect. It gives them something that okay, I'm going to file this away, and I know who these people are. A lot of the escalations, and I think Ed and Peter can certainly chime in, a lot of escalations come from either panic or the unknown. So let's address as much of it as we can, And I find that if you partner with sales, if you partner with even going back to your BDRs, right? Because the old adage, a successful renewal starts at the acquisition side of things, right? So I like to almost over communicate. We're not planning on it, probably will happen. Here's how you would approach an escalation.
Can I highlight something else? Sometimes it can be a little not a good thing to avoid escalations. I used to work for a software vendor who the CEO was famous for getting in front of large customer audiences and say, "Call me on this number." And he would have his phone number on the screen if you're unhappy and you need to escalate something. And you know what? It just drove terror through the company to the point where people were putting in place almost mechanisms to avoid the escalation, which robbed us of opportunity to really understand what's happening with the customer. I mean, he abandoned that after a while when he got feedback that it was counterproductive. And anyways, so I think, escalations, I like to see them as, again, unavoidable. They're inevitable, but they're great opportunities to, as Graham says, to engage the other stakeholders in the company who you need to bring on board to really address the immediate customer challenges, but also systemic ones within your organization, within your company that should probably be, have a spotlight on them.
Yeah, that's, I think that, we need to learn something from every escalation, and hopefully, from that escalation, whether it's a misset expectation in the sales process, it's a missing piece of functionality in the product, it's a poor handoff in success or to support, that we need to try and learn something from, because I think at least what I found in my 20 plus years of experience is there's usually, it's very rare that there's some really just outlier that is just one of those one in a million chance. It's something that if we looked at this and we just figured out what the root cause is and then tweak some of the process or tweak some of the training we need to believe, to give or educate, the customer acquisition team in certain aspects, that there's always something that we can be doing to fine tune things and improve and drive towards avoiding the majority of those escalations.
It's interesting, Andrew, and I'll pick up on something that I was thinking of when you were going through that, is we often think of escalations as being reactive, as the customer or coming to us, right? But there's also internal escalations. Yeah. The phone, the folks working the support line, if you have one, have to turn to someone, and then that gets escalated internally. So you can't just go, and I'll pick on my friends in product, because I was on a call earlier, right? You can't just go to your product manager when there's an escalation and it being the first time you've ever talked to them. You have to build rapport. You have to build understanding. You have to make sure that it's a give and take, right? So not all escalations have the same weight behind them. So is the sky really falling? Or is this something that we can methodically work through in the next release? And I think understanding that and building that rapport internally is often the missing component of an escalation. We're always reactive as it's coming to us, but we in turn have to go internally as well.
Yeah. And to pick up something you said, Andrew, about that, the tracking of this and really the prevention activity. In a former life, we did exactly that. We actually captured every one of those escalations and we documented them. And every quarter we would go through and do some analysis on that. We do a Pareto diagram and really understand, are there some things that are happening consistently? And then what do we do in our processes to try to prevent those from happening again, right? So that would drive continuous improvement. And as we address those issues, then we get a flatter distribution. Then we started to see what you were saying, Andrew, where it's just once in a blue moon. There's just no way you could have, such an oddball set of circumstances came together. Those, when you start seeing those, there's not much you can do. That's category life, and stuff happens and you deal with it as best you can. But we tracked escalation rate as a KPI. We drove continuous improvement from it. And we had a fairly small rate, only about 1.5% of the time would we bounce into something like that. So it's you have to have a closed loop mechanism and drive continuous improvement to really.
You have to. I've worked for companies. I've worked for companies before. There's one in particular that prided themselves at having a team that could firefight. But the problem, and that was great. But the problem is that we didn't do the analysis, the root cause analysis, and then try and fix it. They prided themselves in firefighting. When you do that, though, when you don't go fix the problem, you create a lot more work. You create a lot of friction, and you end up burning people out.
Yeah, it's very risky. It's very risky.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is you're, in a sense, putting the firefighting piece on a pedestal, and that's kind of dangerous. I mean, it's in the moment, it's nice. It's like, yay, we did a great job, and authentically, you're happy. But to your point, Andrew, you're not really addressing any underlying conditions that should be.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. And then, okay, so we've talked about kind of avoiding escalations. We'll get to some questions here in a few minutes. I see we got a number coming in. Remember, if you have questions, please use that Q&A button at the bottom, or take a look at we've got 8 already posted. So take a look at what's been posted to upvote if you want to upvote. So we've talked about avoiding escalations, how important that is, being the Smokey the Bear and preventing the forest fires, right? And by the way, and I've talked, this is fresh in my mind. The last few weeks, I've talked to a number of cohorts about this, of my coaching cohorts about this. You can't just throw stuff over the fence. And I'm going to continue to kind of pick on customer acquisition side because they're easy pickings. But you can't just say, hey, you need to sell this better. You need to make the first move and go tell them and explain to them, hey, I'm here to help, right? Yeah. This is to help me, help you, help me, right? So you need to make the first move and not just, bitch and moan about it. You need to actually help re-educate them. So we got the avoiding escalations piece. We talked about learning from it. Any thoughts, any best practices before we jump into questions about what's the best way to deal with them? And Graham, you touched on one about communication. I think communication is incredibly important. If anything, over communicate when you're escalating. Anything else out there that you want to throw out for the folks listening?
I mean, I used to tell my teams, give gifts to whoever you're dealing with, like product or sales organization, people, your peers. If you're going to go for an ask, bring something of value for them, even if it's small, if it's a lead, if you're talking with a salesperson, give them the sense there's an opportunity and give them context. And actually, at the very minimum, give them the context of your ask. I think most people are really intelligent business people in all organizations. And so they appreciate getting the full picture. So if you have an ask, put it into the context of the whole business value for your company and ultimately for the customer. And they get it. People get it. And they're not going to just dismiss you if they hear the whole story, right? So that to me is like a freebie. It's easy to do that sort of thing. It builds up goodwill.
It does. And it's something, by the way, you should be doing before you have an escalation.
That's right.
Be giving gifts leading up into it, right?
Yeah, and that gift could also be time, right? I love to participate in product meetings, not talking about is the button supposed to be blue and on the left or right, but just philosophically, where are we trying to take the product? Are we balancing, stakeholder needs? Same with sales. I love to we have a once a month, it's actually a little bit more often, but not just a deal review, but really what could I do better for you as post-sales? Because I think that's really important. So that's almost an internal workshop. That is that gift giving, right? It's the time. It's to hear their struggles if you're talking about the acquisition side, so that I can have that in the back of my mind. Okay, I have to look out for that so that doesn't become a pain point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess I would add, in the process when you're really engaged with a customer and you have an escalation happening, one of the things that I've learned in the past, and actually out of luxury hospitality where I spent about 10 years, is that there's a really handy 5-step process to keep in mind when these things happen with a customer and they start exploding on you. And the steps are, first one is to empathize, right? And to reflect back their feelings and not to take it personally, right? To say, I can understand why that's frustrating. If I were in your shoes, I'd be that angry too, right? So to really name the feeling and to reflect it back, not to judge.
Active
The second
listening.
thing is to apologize, right? A lot of times we don't say, I'm sorry this happened.
Yeah.
But just people need to hear, I'm sorry that we're in the situation that we're in. I'm genuinely sorry.
Yeah.
The next one is to restore service as quickly as possible, right? I mean, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to fix this. and get going on it and escalate it internally and get people working on it. The next one is to communicate. When people are sitting there, the clock is ticking and they're waiting. And you can't just not talk to them, right? So all throughout the crisis, you need to be following up repeatedly. Here's how we're going to let you know how things are progressing. And the last thing is to follow up when it's all solved. Excuse me. So in following up, typically people want to hear a couple things. One is, what did you learn from this and how are you going to prevent this from happening next time, right? Yep. And the next one is, what are you going to do for me? There's this expectation of restitution or enumeration, credit to the bill, something like that. And this simple 5-step approach, candidly, people skip this all the time. And when there's a major outage, even big companies struggle with this, right? And very rarely do, when you have an outage that affects thousands of customers, going through the same process works in that regard too. If you do that effectively, once again, you can increase loyalty because people see how you handle it. I think customers do understand things are not perfect. Once you kind of work with them through how they're feeling about it, they start to understand what's happening. Then they come to appreciate what you do in the wake of that.
Empathize, apologize, remediate, communicate, follow up.
You got it.
That was a free workshop. Thanks, Ed.
There you go. There you go.
I would also add in ask, right? And I know that sounds a little bit out of left field. I was on a recent escalation and I must have been missing something. I didn't understand why it was such a drop everything type situation. And I admitted that, right? It was a vulnerable moment. I said, I get it. It doesn't seem like drop everything. They said, have you thought about X, Y, and Z? And it was a timing issue and they had a limited window. But I just asked. I said, okay, I understand that. Let me try to get this solved for you. And I think that often is overlooked too, to tack on to Ed's 5 points.
Yeah, you want to seek to understand why. You really do want to understand why this has become such an issue. And actually, in all of those cases, and Peter, led off with this, you need to attach the context to the content. And so one more best practice I have for folks before we get to the Q&A is when you have an escalation, don't expect to communicate the context with the content via email. Pick up the phone and call someone.
That's right.
Right? If it's that big of an issue, pick up the freaking phone, right? We default to Slack, we default to email, but the problem is with that type of communication, you lose the context.
Yeah, and I wonder, Ed, if you had any research on the way the brain operates on the verbal versus the visual of an email versus the phone call and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I think as a practical matter, we've all, sent those emails and people send back a really angry email. And they're like, wow, totally misunderstood what I was trying to say here. But, I think, Andrew, you're spot on is people need to talk this through. You need to unpack those emotions. You need to de-escalate the situation. You can't do that in email. You can't do that in Slack. You've got to get on the phone and talk to people.
Yeah, and speaking of that word de-escalation, I asked a colleague about this webinar, do you have any kind of input for me? And they said, what if you propose that we rename the process to de-escalation? And I thought, well, that wouldn't work for a customer because they don't want to hear that you're going to de-escalate, right? Because it might denote that you're not going to, you're putting all your effort into kind of minimizing it or something. So it's a good idea, but not a great idea.
Well, and I think the suggestion's in the right place. It's like, well, it's the same concept of, do we refer to it as churn or do we refer to it as renewal rates, right? One's more positive, one's more negative.
That's right.
Yeah. So, cool. All right. So let's take some questions. Unless you guys okay with that?
Sure.
Excellent. So, Ash, thanks I know Ash personally. So Ash, great to see you on the webinar, and thanks for the question here. This was upvoted quite a bit. What best practices can the panelists share around building documentation for protocol and best practices for customer escalations? GitLab, for example, has a comprehensive internal support escalation plan and matrix. Is any referenceable material? Did you guys have any referenceable material that you could share?
Well, I would say, an escalation has a lot of different contexts. There's the Sev 1 problem, where customers are down and they can't do work. And there's some pretty well documented processes for that. And in fact, I'm working with a client right now who has really a truly world-class way of handling that and, triaging and actually going through this, because when they go down, there's serious stuff that's going on. So, I think it's contextual, and I think you need to look at that. But in terms of just the mishaps, the misunderstandings when customers get sideways on a term or on a renewal or on a scope of work or a missed expectation, one thing that I did is I actually trained my people on this 5-step process, and we drilled on this, right? Because it was something that we wanted to develop that muscle memory. So we did a lot of case study simulation where we would run these scenarios until people were really comfortable with that. Because if you can do that, and in support as well, I mean, I've run customer support operations, that is a soft skill. You cannot assume that people know how to do that. And in fact, in other call centers, they do a lot of training on that exact thing. And I think that's a skill that all customer success managers should have, because you're going to run into this and you need to know how to handle it.
Yeah, I think I can't share any proprietary kind of process that we have, but I would recommend just look to the analysts. I'm sure Gartner publishes guidance for support organizations on how to handle something like that. And for sure, I know that TSIA does. Their support research is excellent. And a lot of their stuff is just for member companies, but they publish free stuff too. And so I would recommend you go to that site. They probably have some asset that you can download that shows you kind of best practices for support escalations and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think certainly the best practice is to go through it and document it, right? So it's going to be different for each organization. In all the organizations where I've run either support or customer success, I've gone through that because I want to make sure that we're not missing any gaps. So if you haven't gone through that exercise of how do you handle if you have, again, phone support, or if you have email support, or if you're using Zendesk, what exactly are you planning to do with that? Are you going to let it queue up and then you're going to panic and jump in and sort of try to pick things off? Or do you have a methodical process to understand? Is it client-based, right? Do you have your top 5, 10, 15, 50 clients that when anything comes in, they have a sub-process, right? So I think going through that, looking at documenting it, so each new person that comes into your organization has it as a base to start with, it is really the best practice that I could offer.
Yeah, racy.
Yeah, we in our small company, we use Confluence. When we figure something out, hey, we got to figure out how to address this particular issue. Once we figure it out, we put it in Confluence, so that anybody who joins us can refer to that. So and it doesn't have to be anything fancy, even in Confluence, it could be just could be a punch list.
Well, you see those patterns, right? Kind of to what Ed was saying, and that's your continuous feedback. If if the same thing happens 5 times, the escalation, you probably should adjust it, right?
Exactly, and that's a great lead into the next question. Thanks, Ash, by the way, for the question and all that upvoted it. Kim, thank you for the question. Since Kim asks, since most escalations are typically reactive, I would love to hear what the panelists do to identify escalation trends to prevent them. Customers forgive new mistakes, but aren't as forgiving when organizations repeat the same mistakes over and over again. Ned, I know you touched on that earlier. Anything more that you want to that you want to go into that, or anything else that Graham or Peter you want to add to that?
I can add something. So our organization, Customer Success, is I would say immature around the identification of patterns. However, we're working hip to hip with the support organization now, which is pretty advanced. So they have introduced AI and machine learning into their processes, and so they're well along the road to the identification of patterns, and we're benefiting from that. It's still early days, but we're really excited and optimistic that we'll be able to leverage their expertise in that regard. But I totally agree with this question. I love it because it speaks to the root cause challenge for all this stuff, and I think that's what you have to get to.
One of the things that as I'm looking at Kim's question again is I'm thinking about the organization also has to recognize that the same mistake is being made over and over again.
Mhm.
And oftentimes in smaller organizations where, I have a small mid-sized organization, background, they tend to be so caught up in moving on to the next thing, we've gotten through it. They may not have recognized that that's an issue, right? So recognizing patterns, recognizing like, hey, this feels and looks like we're going to go down that same path, raise our hand, like we've already been down that, escalate that inside your own organization is a great first step as well.
Yeah, I would say, continuous improvement is an organizational discipline, and not every organization has it. There's levels of maturity that organizations go through. And as we've talked about before, the lowest level is firefighting, right? We're just living to survive another day. The next level above that is control. How do we put some things into place so that we at least have control over the chaos? The next level above that is continuous improvement. And that doesn't happen by accident. That is a commitment of the organization to set aside time and resources to learn how to do this and to carve out the time. Stephen Covey in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, many of you have maybe read this, but the first habit is be proactive. He talks about sharpening the saw, right? So this idea of we just can't keep using that saw over and over and over again until it wears out. We have to stop and sharpen the saw. We have to keep our tools sharp. And that takes time and effort, and you have to invest in doing that. And you have to have an organization that supports that top down, preventing problems, preventing errors, preventing escalations, preventing churn is a top priority for the organization, and it has to flow top down.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I would say leadership has to step up and really articulate a vision for how escalations, A, need to be handled, but B, how they can be instrumental in helping the organization mature and ultimately serve the customers better. If that's missing, I think it's going to be really hard for companies to get out of the escalation traps of repeating things over and over and over again.
And people say that they don't have enough time. The problem, though, is that the time that you put into having to fix an escalation far exceeds getting it right the first time. You end up spending so much more time and energy, in trying to fix things than just doing it right out of the gate. So that is a flawed argument. Cool. Thanks, Kim, for the question. David. Also know David. David, thanks for joining us, and thanks for the question. Every escalation is an opportunity to build more trust and credibility. How do you build internal collaboration with departments that are your weakest link in improving processes to mitigate future escalations and not interested in collaborating? I've had this personally. I've had this situation with sales before. And there was the carrot versus the stick, right? And we always went the carrot first, right? And if that didn't work, we'd use the stick. And the stick usually involved not allowing them to set their deals to closed won if they hadn't, filled out a whole bunch of information that we needed to make the transfer of information a key moment of truth as smooth as possible. So how have you guys in the past worked to build or rebuild or smooth out that type of thing?
Yeah, I was just going to say it kind of goes back to it has to be top down. It has to be the CEO, and really being completely committed to this. And in quarterly business reviews, when you look across the organization, what are those KPIs? And he or she needs to look at that and say, what are we doing about this, right? And those, it all rolls up to the CEO. And if they get it and they are working on building a sustainable, high-performing business system, they need to pay very close attention to this. And they need to expect that they're going to have to bring their functional managers along in this, right? So it again, as Deming said, quality begins in the boardroom. If it's not there, it doesn't flow through the whole organization.
Yeah, and I think this is why a chief customer officer, a chief experience officer, someone like that is vital for, mostly it's larger organizations that do that sort of thing. But that's their role, frankly, is at least one of their kind of set of responsibilities is to bring the leadership together to agree on why it's important that collaboration takes place. I love that loaded and not interested in collaborating between the parentheses. I think makes me chuckle because it's true. Some organizations do not show any interest in doing that. You have to figure it out, right? And if they, as Ed said, if it's not coming from the top, it's really hard to do.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, the customer's not looking at customer success versus customer support versus versus product. They're looking at your logo, your organization.
It's about the brand.
Yeah, exactly. It's about the brand, and everybody at the company should care about that.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question, though. If you think about it, is why are, my mind goes to why are they the weakest link, right? Is it that they're scared of something, they've never done it before, they need additional training, some additional support? Is it a communication thing? So yeah, I think that question goes a couple of different ways, but I personally love to just go, let's talk about it, let's understand, let's make sure, are we on the same, like, we don't have to, I'll never criticize a peer in an open setting, but I will give them the opportunity, and I usually say, hey, look, I'm looking for some constructive criticism about me, and how I'm handling things. Maybe you get something out of that communication, and maybe they're scared. Maybe they don't buy into it. And there are some interpersonal things I think you can do to help maybe turn around their behavior and their willingness to collaborate.
Mm-hmm. I think something that we need to do, and if you think about it, we do this with our customers already, is we need to employ empathy.
Yes.
And just like we work with our customers, and we actually teach this in our level 2 training, we talk about how we need to empathize with the people in the other groups internally that we depend on for support, right? And understand their perspective, understand how how are you graded? What are your objectives, right? And how could this ask, play a role into achieving or not achieving those objectives, because that's what that person's thinking about.
Yep.
So it's almost like we need to follow some of those 5 steps that Ed mentioned. So thank you, David, for that question. Kind of tangentially to that, Elsavet asks, any insights how you educate cross-functionally the escalation process and provide some insights on how you offer transparency?
Yeah, what we do is we set up meetings between the organizations. And for example, I'm going to be delivering a presentation in a couple of weeks to the support organization about all about customer success, our processes, our service model, our skills, like a full-blown, this is not just going to be a dump on them, but it's going to be like a strategy session with a lot of detail so that they appreciate or have a better appreciation for what it is this service is all about, and vice versa. So that's how we are addressing it. And you can do the same thing. It doesn't happen as often, but with product and sales too.
Yeah, I've done it 2 ways. I've done it the way where you have the lunch and learns and all that fun stuff. But the most successful way I've ever brought this to an organization, or felt it was successful, was building it into the new employee onboarding process.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that it becomes Andrew, you talked about, Peter, and it's the top down, right? The organization is bought into this. This is important. If you're going to come work at Accent or Oracle or any of these other organizations, this is part of your onboarding. And so folks know how to deal with it. They know that it's important. They know there's visibility. You know that you have to participate and not be the weakest link when you're joining these organizations.
Yep. Perfect.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. I've used for the last 2 decades, same approach. And once again, we had to make the first move. I'd like to sit down with your team and help them understand how we work and how things escalate, how we deal with escalations, because your team is involved in this, and I want to work with you to put together an escalation process, which is better,
Mm-hmm.
that we're working together to collaborate to build out this process. So we're both on the same page, and then let's present it to the broader team.
Yeah.
You understand.
There's more work with that strategy, but it has better outcomes.
Yeah.
I agree.
And that's why we use huge fan of RACI.
Yep.
The RACI methodology, and and doing a RACI in a shared space. We use Google Sheets to do RACIs. I know now Microsoft has you can share Excel spreadsheets as well, but someplace where you can collaborate as a team, and everybody can check in and see where things are at with that process. So, excellent. Thanks for that question, Elsvet. Ash has another question for you, Graham. How do you avoid damaging a relationship you've already built with product when the client escalation has pushed back to the product team's vision and goal?
That never happens. Ash, I can't believe you're asking it. So it's a give and take, right? And that's not the cop-out answer. It really is, right? I'm not going to win all of them. I'm not going to lose all of them. And I think understanding the product vision, understanding that an escalation truly has an impact on the product is important. I can't understate the necessity to build a strong relationship with your sales counterpart, your marketing counterpart, and your product counterpart, right? And if you're not building those relationships right now, you should be. And product's going to fall down, believe it or not, sometimes, right? And they're going to need you to pick them up. And that's really the best advice I can give, because if not, you're just going to be in a battle of who's right and who's wrong, and in their mind, right? They're going to hold the product focus, and I'm going to have the customer advocacy focus. But it really is a give and take. Do me the solid one time. Behind the scenes, I might back off on something else. And it really comes down to that diplomacy around it. It's the simplest answer I could give around that.
Oh, and I also think you need to demonstrate to product that, and you need to be willing to have that difficult conversation with the customer.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
So you have to be, you have to be product shield in this as well, which creates, which improves your trusted advisor relationship with your product team as well.
Yeah, I think I also sit in a unique situation where I've been a product manager before, and I've had sales and I've had customer success coming to me and say, Andrew, you talk about empathy. Boy, do I know how painful and terrifying those conversations are when you get them at 7 o'clock at night. So I've been in that position, and maybe that gives me a little bit of an advantage of knowing when to back off and knowing that I'm going to call you maybe on a Monday afternoon versus a Friday afternoon, right? Something like that.
Oh yeah, nobody wants to get that call at 6 p.m. on Friday when you're trying to check out for the weekend. Okay, let's see. Kim has another question here. Someone mentioned KPIs around escalations. I'd be interested to hear more about this. When it becomes a stick versus a carrot, does that drive avoidance? Also, are there scenarios where there would be KPIs around escalations for non-customer facing teams? There is generally a larger bias for action when it comes to customer facing team versus non. Would love ideas about how to drive accountability there. There's a lot there.
Yeah, so I can take the one about the metrics. The example I was sharing was, I ran all customer facing service delivery. I reported to the CEO, and we had a practice every month and every quarter. We all had dashboards. So I had my dashboard of 10 different metrics. This is one of the metrics that I reported every month. And we would, because all services reported to me, and I'm a continuous improvement guy, we would pull a team together. I would schedule it every quarter, and we go through that list, and they would be documenting it, and we would do root cause analysis against all of those. And then that would launch projects for the next quarter. So this was an ongoing activity, and that worked really well. And for us, we prioritize around customer facing because of everything we talked about here, that these moments of truth really are impactful for whether or not you're going to hang on to your customers. And if this was something that my boss, the CEO, we talked about this, every month, every quarter, this was high on his list of priorities. So this was ongoing activity. Now, internally, working out escalations between, departments, those kinds of things that don't necessarily touch customers, I probably can't speak to that, but I think that probably, in my experiences, gets worked out in the normal course of business. Yeah.
It does. For me, a lot of experience dealing on the contractual side, escalated contracts. People have disputes, and even though I'm customer success, I'm facing the customer, and you have to figure out how to get a sense of urgency lit under certain organizations. And again, for me, it's all about the context, right? If you can articulate the business impact for the customer, you're not saying the customer is right. What you're saying is, here's the customer's story, and I'm going to communicate it with as much flesh to the bone as possible, so that you fully appreciate their point of view. Not saying it was right or wrong, but you're the legal department. It's up to you now to figure out what the decision should be, and here's the urgency, and then that's it. I mean, and I think that for me is how I drove accountability, is just by really doing a good job of telling the story to people.
The non-customer facing escalations is an interesting one that I'm thinking about. I've had experience where a big one where marketing tagging technology wasn't working right on the site, right? I mean, I understand why that's a big deal to our organization. So if marketing is coming to me as a product person, or handles the website, or even says, hey, Graham, I need you to pause something and help out, I get that. So I think it goes back to understanding why is this impacting you customer, you marketing, you support, whatever it may be, so that I can help frame it for me. But I may disagree with Kim. I do think that internal escalations do get, sometimes they can take over an entire organization, right? I mean, we've all seen where certain pet projects or certain things just kind of spiral out of control. But I think if you have rapport with other areas of your organization, you'll understand that it truly is something that needs to be attended to internally.
Yeah, and I think, and Peter, you touched on it a couple of times. I think we all touched on it before. It needs to be top down. You want to drive accountability, it needs to be top down. It needs to be expectation setting at the highest levels of the organization. One tool that we used at a couple of different companies is we tied part of everybody's variable component to NPS.
I love that.
Yeah. So, we're all
perfect.
They're right there. That was usually a great tool for us to use internally.
Yep.
All focused on making sure the customer experience, the customer.
I mean, when you do that, it creates a lot of tough conversations for the leadership and the managers to communicate that really effectively. But it's a good metric, I think, for everybody, because it centers their effort, right?
Exactly.
On the customer. Yeah.
Yeah. And for companies that hadn't been using NPS, actually, for one of the companies that I worked with, they used NPS. We established it. So, okay, here's our NPS score that we're at right now. We want to see this type of positive movement to it. And we're going to measure this with on a quarterly basis. We didn't measure our customers quarterly. We took 25, because we only do it once a year. We took 25% of our customers randomly, and we sat there and measured it. But it was a great tool to use. So great. Thanks, Kim. We got time for maybe one more question. Let's see here. Okay. Andrew asks, it seems like most of my escalations are support case, kind of quick turnaround, product defect, which is weeks to years reaction, and product enhancements, years reaction. Expectation management is probably our biggest struggle. How can this be managed with customers? Would love to hear this perspective, Graham, from your product management.
I'm laughing because Andrew must have been in an earlier meeting that I was having today. This exact thing came up. We're talking about road mapping for 2021. I'm very transparent about it. I always think there's company vision, there's technical debt, there's some room for hot fixes and all that fun stuff, but then there should be a box for customer enhancements or customer features. I truly believe that. If that's not in your organization, I would try to carve that out, at least with your product manager. Understanding how big that little box is goes a long way to setting expectations, right? And so customers will ask and ask and ask. There's 4 answers, and I've talked about this quite a bit. There's yes now, yes later, no never, and no not now. if you give a customer or prospect one of those answers, at least they know where they stand and they know that they can influence them, right? A no, not now means, oh, there's still hope. Is it because your roadmap isn't ready for it? It's too technically complex. If we can give one of those 4 answers back to a client, we can then start managing expectations. You can start influencing that little box of that's on the roadmap.
Yep.
Anything else, you guys? Anything else to add?
Well, I would just say it helps if you're using a community to collect the enhancements and have the community weigh in on that, because it just supports some of your communication later as well. 2% of the customers supported this idea. It's not a bad idea, but we have to prioritize accordingly. I think customers, everyone's intelligent enough. If you have a good conversation with people, they kind of get it. They might be disappointed, but they're not going to be super irritated if you don't give them proper status. Transparency usually wins the day, I think.
Yeah, I would, if you're not doing it, have some sort of user council or customer council, where you can bring the product managers in as a fly on the wall and they can hear it, right? Nothing's worse than saying, oh, all the customers want this. I can't believe you're not doing this in your product roadmap. And you call them out on it and it's one customer, right? It's discrediting. But if you can get the pulse of your base, that can also help influence timelines as well.
Yep.
Well, I think that's an important role that CSMs play. And that's part of the get with product, right? We've compiled this list of customers that are all basically asking for the same thing, and it makes up this much, right? It makes up this much ARR, and this is the business case. I mean, this is where it's so important to match the context with the content. And you just like your customers trying to build that business case with you as an individual CSM, you need to be able to build that business case with product as well. You can't just sit there and say, customers asking for this, right? There's some effort that you need to put behind that. And it's not up to product to connect the dots. It's up to you, just like we do with our customers, to help them connect the dots between what they're trying to achieve and what we can give them. It's up to us to go to product and help them connect the dots between what the customer is asking for and why this would be good for us. But to your point, Graham, if there's one person that's asking for it, that's just not realistic, unless that one company is 80% of your revenue. And if that's the case, you got other problems.
Yeah, that's a whole different situation that you got to address.
Exactly. All right. Well, we're at the end of our hour, and I want to thank all of our guests for joining us today. Thank you, Ed, Graham, and Peter, for the time. Welcome. It was a great conversation as usual. As I thought when we met the first time, I thought we'd have a lot to talk about. We didn't get through. We actually got through less than half the questions. So, it was a great conversation, and I appreciate you all spending the time. And I wish you all a fantastic holiday season as we end this. Well, it's a family show. As we end this year. One final note that I like to end things with: great CSMs know they don't have all the answers, but they know where to get them. And that's why we've created the CSM Mastermind, as well as our new CS Leadership Roundtable, to harness the knowledge and experience of the community to help everyone. So we hope that everybody got something out of this discussion, and we'll see you at our next event on January 20th, when we'll discuss transitioning accounts between CSMs. And also, once again, look out for the Customer Success Leadership Roundtable. We'll be posting it on the website here in the next week or so, successcoaching.co, to find out more and to sign up. Have a great rest of your day and week. Have a great holiday season. Happy New Year to everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll talk to you next year. Thanks.
Everybody.
Thanks. Bye.